Securing your future, guys. I have a new series that we're gonna talk to a family law attorney. We're gonna also have an estate planning attorney here that is going to walk us through how to secure your future, guys. So today we're gonna talk about the premarital property one-on-one. But before we jump into that, I am Keyra Ford, your real estate cheerleader, where I help you take ownership of where you live and how you live and help you confidently invest in yourself through real estate. So let's welcome my two guests. I have Britney and I have Antoinette. Guys, you are in for a treat. I'm super excited for Britney and Antoinette to tell you all about themselves. So let's first start with Britney. Can you tell us a little bit about you?
Hi, I'm Britney Harrison and I'm a family law attorney here in Dallas, Texas. I've been practicing law since 2010, but exclusively practicing family law about 8 years of that. I love doing everything from family formation to premarital agreements, cohabitation agreements, divorce, child custody, and even modifications and enforcements after there's been an order entered.
Awesome, Britney. Well, we're super excited to have you as well. And let me bring on Antoinette and she'll introduce herself as well.
I am an estate planning, probate, guardianship, and asset protection planning attorney. My office is in Euless. You can find me online at abonelaw.com. I also have a YouTube page with the same name, Abone Law. And our office phone number is 817-462-5454. I have been doing estate planning in private practice for, I think, 12 and a half years or so now.
Woo! That's a lot.
Yeah, I can't believe it's been that long either. How I got into estate planning, I spent 4 years on active duty as a JAG in the Air Force. And what most people are surprised to learn is that we do a lot of estate planning as JAGs, no matter what branch of the service that you're in. And so I found that I actually kind of enjoyed it. And when I was looking around at what I was going to do in private practice, I chose to do estate planning. I quite enjoy it. It's intellectually challenging. It's like putting puzzle pieces together. And you know, what I do is I help people engage in thoughtful estate planning. So, you know, I focus on high income married professionals and business owners and helping them ensure that the wealth that they've accumulated over their lifetime, as well as their intangible wealth, gets transferred to the people that matter to them most. And, you know, for business owners, coordinating their business plans with their estate plans, because most of the time for business owners, their wealth is tied up in their business. So we have to make a plan for how that is going to transfer to the people that they want to transfer it to.
I love that. And two, first off, thank you for your service. All right, Britney. So we're super excited for you guys to both be here. These questions are going to really go more towards you. But of course, like chime in whenever you want, Antoinette. This is like an open combo. So my first question to you is, how does the law view property before marriage and during marriage?
All right, so until there's a marriage, there's no community, because Texas is a community property state. So when someone gets married, that's when the community starts. And so during marriage, anything you acquire during the marriage is going to be presumed community property, just like your income is presumed community property. And I say presumed because it's a presumption that can be rebutted. If someone wants to say it's their separate property, then it generally will be property that falls into one of three categories. Number one, property acquired prior to marriage is your separate property. Property acquired regardless of prior or during the marriage if it was gifted to you. And then property that comes to you via inheritance. So if it falls into one of those three categories, if you want to say that that's your separate property, you have to prove by clear and convincing evidence that that is your separate property. Because in Texas, under the Constitution, the courts cannot divest you of your separate property. So once you've proven it's your separate property, it has to be awarded to you per the Constitution.
Okay. Whew, that's a lot. Let's see. Okay, so I know when I have some friends, they're always like, okay, what are the potential risks that could happen if I'm like cohabitating before marriage? Like, what are the items that show that I'm just the owner? So is that kind of what you just said, or?
Well, a little bit in that. So if you wanted, so kind of there's the person that wants to protect their property, and then there's also the other person in the relationship. So we'll start with the person that wants to protect their property. So with that, you want to make sure if you're buying something before marriage, or if you're not intending to get married, you're buying something just by yourself, you want to make sure your name is the one that's on the deed and not the other person. And then on the flip side, if the person that you're, living with wants to also be a part of that house legally, then you do need to be on the deed to that house. And then you just want to have the same protections that you would have as a married couple if you're just cohabitating. Does that make sense? And so you just want to make sure, kind of know what your goals are. If you're wanting to protect your property, don't put the other person on the deed, because that's the fastest way to show that you gifted your property over to them. You also just want to make sure that on paper, you're keeping things separate. And then to make sure that everything is clearly separate, if you want to cohabitate but not actually get married, we do cohabitation agreements all the time. And that basically just delineates, okay, what is mine? What is yours? What are we going to have together? What happens if we break up? It just kind of settles all of that right away. The one thing it probably won't cover is what happens if one of the parties passes away. You can put that in there, but I tend to rely upon Antoinette's attorney, the estate planning attorneys, that kind of help us with that aspect of it, because the protections that you have for a married couple, you don't have those if you're just cohabitating as two single people that are just living together. And Antoinette, right, you may be able to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so if this actually happened recently, an unmarried couple, wanted to do some estate planning, and I'm like, do you have a cohabitation agreement? And the answer was no. And they wanted to do planning together, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to do planning for you as a couple if you don't have this agreement in place. And I don't do cohabitation agreements. I don't do premarital agreements. I don't do marital agreements. I send that kind of stuff out to somebody like Britney, who does those things, because that's just outside of my wheelhouse. Now, there are some estate planning attorneys that will do those for their clients. But I would say if that's the case, you should look to see if a part of their practice is family law, because drafting these marital and cohabitation agreements is more complicated than people might think it is. And as a non-family law practitioner, it's just not a pool that I want to wade in. But like Britney was saying, because you are not treated the same under the law like married people, you do have to take extra steps in order to preserve your interest in property. And so when you die, if you want that other person to receive your property, you absolutely have to plan, because it's not going to just magically happen.
And I would love for Britney, for you to kind of surface level talk about a prenup, a marriage agreement, because I know we touched on that, but maybe people don't exactly. Is it a lot? Like, you don't have to tell us like prices and things to that extent, but just so people can have an idea of, we know why you should have it, but what all does it take to actually do it?
So we'll talk about the premarital agreements first. So if you do intend to get married, like formally, it's good to have that premarital agreement, because it'll outline, okay, what is spouse number one? What's their property? What's spouse number one's liabilities, all their debts, obligations? What are those things? Same thing for the other spouse. What are their assets? What are their liabilities, debts, and obligations? And it outlines exactly what those are. And then the parties get to choose whether or not they want to have the protections of Texas community property laws, or if they want to say, you know what, we don't want to deal with that. We want to just have it clear. What's in my name is mine. What's in your name is yours. And we keep it separate. Any income that's earned from that same property remains separate. And that's what the premarital agreement can do. If something happens and the parties do divorce, the premarital agreement will also talk about, in the event of a dissolution, either through marriage or through death, this is what will happen. And a lot of times I hate calling it this, but we call them the death provisions. A lot of times we will sometimes speak with an estate planner just to make sure that what we're doing in that premarital agreement is actually going to work in the estate planning arena, because we have our family code, which is where That's where I do. And then there's the estate code. I don't go in the estate code. That's
You
not
stay in your lane.
I stay in my lane. I stay with my family code. Like,
they'll keep passing the
back and
ball
forth.
back and forth.
Yeah, that's where you have problems and there can be some malpractice. So you stay in your lane. And so that's what the premarital agreement, it tends to basically just say, okay, this is what we have. This is what we want to happen to our property during marriage. If we divorce, this is what's going to happen. So I sometimes like to think of prenups as insurance. Like if you have a pet, you might have insurance on that pet. If you have a car, you may have insurance on that car. Well, you should have insurance on that car, but you may not need to use that insurance, but it's there in the event you need it. And so a lot of times people are like, well, premarital agreements are so unromantic. I get that. But, marriage, it is about love. It's about all those wonderful things, but it's also about the merging and protection of assets. And finances tend to be a very large issue of why people divorce. Why don't you just go ahead and take that out of the equation, and you already know what's going to happen with your finances because it's all written out. You've communicated about what you want and it's taken care of. And now you can just go live your marriage and enjoy your life, but know there's that protection if you need it.
Wait a minute. Before we move on to give any more value, guys, make sure you are commenting below. I want you to put value if this is filling you up. But not only that, if you have any questions for me when it comes to real estate, I would love if you scheduled a strategy session so I can help you take ownership of where you live and how you live and get you to where you are, to where you want to be. Let's get back to it. I love that. It's like insurance because, you're right. It's not romantic. And so many people, when they hear about like a prenup, people are like, what? You don't love me? And I like the fact that you're just saying, no, we just want to prepare for the worst. Like I'm a Girl Scout, so Girl Scout honor, always be prepared. And so I think that is a great way to look at it. And I don't think a lot of us look at it that way. So is there anything else that you would want, either one of you would like anyone to know about securing your future when it comes to like either pre-nums or before, during marriage or divorce that everyone would need to know before we...
And we'll get probably more into like what happens when you're married with the post-marital agreements, partition agreements. But as far as like premarital agreements and cohabitation agreements, it's all about communication. And that's part of the basis of any relationship. Just knowing there's something that's in the law that can actually protect you. You just have to be a little bit more proactive about it. Get it done early, live your life after that. But just make sure come visit a family law attorney. And then for the estate planning assets, visit an estate planning attorney, because if you're not married, you don't have those protections that married couples have. And so just make sure that you kind of take those steps ahead of time.
I love that. Well, I trust that this has brought you value. Sorry, Antoinette, did you have something else to add before we jump off?
Things that, yes, people please plan, whether you're married or unmarried. The probate process is just twice as expensive if you don't have a plan. Now, the state of Texas has a plan for you, and you might not like that plan. I mean, if you've been estranged from your parents and you wouldn't want them to receive a red cent of the money that you've earned during your lifetime, you need a plan. Plan to leave that to a charity or your friends, but you need to have a plan. And in terms of like premarital agreements, that's really important if you're wanting to do estate planning. Sometimes there's disparity in wealth when people get married. And so having in writing what property is whose, if you're doing estate planning, it's really important, because especially if we're doing trust-based planning. So we create these buckets that we put assets into, and there's a bucket for separate property. There's different types of property that we haven't really talked about here, but there's different buckets that we create when we do trust-based planning. So having that property identified in a document is very helpful for an estate planning attorney.
Yes.
And property is not treated the same during divorce as it is at death. So like this just goes back to, you need to have a plan.
Have a plan, people, have a plan. And that's why I trust that this has brought you value. I know that you've gotten out of this to have a plan. So all of their information will be below in the description, and make sure you tune in for next week when we talk a little bit about having a plan, especially if you might get a divorce and how that changes when you get a divorce and all the things. So make sure you tune in for that.
my gosh, there she is. It's Keyra Ford. Keyra Ford. You don't know what? Never heard? Oh my gosh, she's played every time.